For my video, I focused on Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, who was a 19th century French artist most famous for his printmaking. And Lautrec focused on scenes of urban life in Paris in the late 19th century and depicted a wide range of subject matter from urban nightlife to prostitution. So let's dive in. So Lautrec was born in 1864 in Albi, France, and he was born to an aristocratic family, which meant financially he was really set for life. And he suffered from a congenital illness. His parents were actually related, and there were complications due to this interbreeding, which, coupled with complications from 2 riding accidents, his legs stopped growing. And it was because of this disability that Lautrec was frequently bedridden, which led him to take up art lessons from a local instructor, and he would sketch while recuperating from health issues. His early work focused a lot on animal portraiture. He loved riding horses, and he was really interested in the movement. He would later take up formal training in Paris. And this is an example of Lautrec's early work. The painting is named Hussars from 1878. It's very different from his later style. He's really filling the canvas with diffused color. He's using a cool color palette. He's employing color in a realistic manner, whereas later in his career, he'll do more garish and more saturated use of color. Then Lautrec moves to Paris in 1882, and he trains in local studios and really develops and matures as an artist, and he was captivated by Parisian nightlife. And Paris was undergoing a massive change. It was the focal place of Impressionism, a lot of artistic inspiration and production was happening, and there's a growing sense of commercialism. And this fascination with French nightlife translates into his paintings. This work is called At the Moulin Rouge from 1892 to 1895. And he really captured a lot of social observations of 19th century France. This is very different from his horse portraiture. He skews his perspective. He leans towards a darker color palette. So when not spending time in the studio doing his formal training, Lautrec spent a lot of time in Paris in a place called Montmartre. And that was the place where Lautrec was frequenting brothels and clubs where he got a lot of his inspiration and rubbed shoulders with impressionists like Degas, who was a big influence on him, and by 1888, Lautrec was making income from his work. He spent a lot of time at the Moulin Rouge, and posters from the Moulin Rouge are probably what Lautrec remains most famous for. In this painting, he shows a can-can dancer and shows the brashness of women who worked in this Parisian nightlife. Yellow color infuses this image, but Lautrec alters the luminosity of the yellow to create a distinction between foreground and background. In terms of technique, Lautrec did paintings, but he's really known as a printmaker. According to MoMA's website, he did 350 lithographic posters and illustrations between 1891 and 1901 when he died. And I want to emphasize this is a big departure from traditional media like painting and sculpture. And here's one of Lautrec's lithographs depicting an entertainer taking a rest. Lautrec turned to lithography in 1892, and he was really going against the grain of what other artists were doing by not doing painting and by not doing sculpture. In the traditional hierarchy of arts, graphic arts are at the bottom, but Lautrec was forging his own path. Lithography was a relatively new medium around Lautrec's time, having been invented in the late 18th century, and is based on the fact that grease and water don't mix. Color lithography, which Lautrec used, is really intensive since you have to use a different stone for each color, and you could use up to 10 or more stones to create a single work, which is very expensive. Also, while in Paris, in terms of inspiration, I've talked about how Lautrec looked to his surroundings and to the Impressionists, but Japanese influence from Japanese woodblock prints is also manifest in Lautrec's work, and this is evident in Lautrec's incorporation of unusual perspectives, flat areas of color, strong silhouettes, and oblique angles. This Japanese influence is really evident in this 1893 work, Devant Happiness, which is a large color poster. He restricts it to 4 colors, gray, black, yellow, and red. And look at this Japanese influence with the emphasis on the silhouette, the areas of flat color that don't mix. And knowing what we know about lithography, think of how intensive and how much hard work it is to craft those details on the face. And here's another 1893 work that shows that Japanese influence with these blocky areas of color. He uses a very saturated, very garish color palette with the red and the blue, and he uses a complementary background with the blue and orange. In terms of subject matter, Lautrec did not just do images of nightlife in Paris, he also did images of prostitutes, which just shows again how avant-garde he was in going against the grain. He wasn't just doing elegant nudes, he was doing scenes of daily life and capturing them in quotidian moments and giving a humanizing spin to it. In fact, Lautrec actually spent some time living in brothels. This is an 1894 work called Woman Pulling Up Her Stockings, which just shows a woman getting dressed in a brothel. And it's important not to just consider the subject matter, but the way Lautrec frames the subject matter. And in doing this painting, Lautrec really shows this is a part of everyday life and really gets away from the stigma of prostitution. Lautrec even did an entire series in a pamphlet of lithographs portraying the daily life of prostitutes. And here you can see that he really distills his color palette, which further reinforces the humanity of prostitutes in this series. And that series of lithographs was called Els. It was made in 1896, and this is one of the images from that series. In it, Lautrec almost completely does away with color. There's a little bit of blue in the background and in the middle ground, but he instead focuses on the silhouette of the woman. And I think it's interesting to look at how Lautrec uses color and takes away color to create a different meaning and different context for his images. Ultimately, Lautrec died at age 36, which was likely a result of syphilis and alcoholism. He was committed towards the end of his life as his mental and physical health declined, and he was buried in France. So, in conclusion, Lautrec was really an incredible artist from late 19th century France. He's primarily known as a printmaker, and he depicted subject matter that you wouldn't really find in traditional fine art. He wasn't doing nudes, he wasn't doing history painting. He was doing prostitutes and nightlife of Paris. He was depicting the everyday, honestly, and he ultimately blurred the distinction between fine art and low art to create something entirely new and avant garde.